Rome, a name that would one day bend nations to its will. But at the beginning, it was only a whisper, a fragile spark in the wilderness. The Romans never forgot their origins, and they told stories so rich, so filled with the touch of gods and destiny, that even centuries later, emperors and poets would repeat them as if they were truth. It began with a wanderer named Aeneas, fleeing from the flames of Troy. Carrying his aged father on his shoulders and leading his young son by the hand, he crossed seas and storms until he reached the shores of Italy. To the Romans, this was not merely a tale. It was proof that their bloodline came from the noblest of warriors, survivors of a world already lost. Generations passed, and the story flowed into another. The twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, were said to be born of Mars, the god of war, and a Vestal virgin named Rhea Silvia. Condemned at birth, they were abandoned by the river Tiber, left to die. But fate had other plans. A she-wolf discovered them, her milk nourishing them until a shepherd found the boys and raised them as his own. From the beginning they were wild, fierce, ambitious. And when the time came to build a city, they quarreled over who would rule it. In the end, Romulus slew Remus. The city took Romulus's name. Rome was born in fratricide, in blood spilled by a brother's hand. The Romans believed this was not shameful, but a mark of their destiny. Nothing great would ever come to them without sacrifice. The early kings of Rome were part legend, part history. Romulus organized the first Senate, gathering the elders into a council. Numa Pompilius was said to have brought religion and sacred rites, binding the people with rituals to the gods. Servius Tullius divided the citizens into classes, assigning them duties according to wealth. These kings were not all tyrants. Some were remembered as wise, even holy. But the last, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was remembered only for arrogance and cruelty. His reign ended in outrage when his son violated Lucretia, a noble woman of Rome. Shamed beyond endurance, Lucretia took her own life, and her death became the spark that set the people aflame. They expelled the kings forever. In 509 BCE, the monarchy ended, and Rome swore itself to a new system, the Republic. The Republic was designed not to trust in one man, but in balance. 2 consuls would share power, elected every year. The Senate, composed of Rome's elders and aristocrats, would advise and direct policy. To guard against injustice, the plebeians, the common people, would eventually gain their own representatives, tribunes with the power to veto unfair laws. And the laws themselves were written down, carved into the 12 tables, so that no one could pretend ignorance or twist justice. The system was imperfect, born in conflict, but it was built to endure. The early republic was surrounded by enemies. Rome was a small city-state among Etruscans, Sabines, Volsci, and other tribes. Its survival depended on war. Every year, the consuls marched out at the head of legions, and every year they returned, victorious or broken, but always ready to fight again. This endless struggle forged Rome into something different. Unlike other cities, Rome did not destroy its enemies completely, nor did it leave them untouched. Instead, it made them allies, granting citizenship or rights in return for loyalty. Rome's strength grew with every foe it defeated, because each battle made the Republic larger, more resilient, more dangerous. But Rome's fiercest enemies were often within. The patricians, wealthy aristocrats, dominated the Senate and hoarded land. The plebeians, who fought in the legions and labored in the fields, demanded a greater share of power. In what came to be known as the conflict of the orders, the plebeians staged walkouts, strikes, and protests. They refused to fight in the legions unless their voices were heard. Slowly, painfully, they won concessions. They gained tribunes who could shield them from injustice, assemblies where they could pass laws, and even the right to intermarry with patricians. By 287 BCE, plebeians had achieved near legal equality, but beneath the surface, inequality still festered. Wealth clung to the few, and the poor remained vulnerable. Rome's wars grew larger as its ambitions stretched beyond the hills of Latium. In the 4th century BCE, Rome suffered one of its greatest humiliations. The Gauls descended from the north, wild tribes crashing into Italy, and in 390 BCE, they captured Rome itself. The senators awaited death in their seats, motionless as statues. The city was burned, the temples plundered, and only the citadel on the Capitoline Hill held out. According to legend, when the Gauls attempted to climb the cliffs at night, the sacred geese of Juno honked loudly, waking the defenders. Rome survived, but scarred and humbled. From then on, the Romans swore that no enemy would ever again breach their city walls. They rebuilt stronger, harder, and more determined. The wars continued. Rome clashed with the Samnites in brutal campaigns that lasted decades. The Samnites were mountain warriors, cunning and fierce, and at the Caudine Forks they trapped a Roman army and forced them to pass under a yoke of spears, a symbol of utter humiliation. Yet Rome endured, adapting, learning, and in time, crushing its enemies. This was Rome's pattern. Defeat was never final. It was only fuel for greater resolve. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome had risen from a local power to the master of Italy. Its legions were disciplined, its alliances wide, its institutions hardened by centuries of struggle. Yet the true test lay across the sea, in the great trading empire of Carthage. The Romans had made themselves strong by fighting neighbors, but the wars to come would decide whether Rome remained a regional power or became a dominion that spanned the known world. As Rome looked outward, its society grew more complex. The legions were not just soldiers, they were farmers, citizens, fathers. Every campaign pulled them from their fields, and when they returned, they often found their lands ruined or taken by the wealthy. Small farmers dwindled, replaced by vast estates worked by slaves captured in war. The city of Rome swelled with the poor, restless and hungry, waiting for leaders who would promise them justice. The Republic was strong in arms, but cracks were spreading in its foundations. Yet in these early centuries, the Romans still saw themselves as a people of virtue, marked by discipline and loyalty. They honored their ancestors, kept strict rituals to the gods, and told stories of heroes like Cincinnatus, who left his plough to lead Rome in war, and then returned to his farm rather than cling to power. It was the image Rome liked to hold of itself, humble, dutiful, incorruptible. Whether or not it was ever true, it became a legend they aspired to live up to. The Republic had survived kings, invasions, and internal strife. But on the horizon loomed conflicts unlike any it had ever faced. Across the waters, Carthage waited with its mighty fleets and its legendary general Hannibal. Rome would face wars of such scale and terror that they would either break the Republic or forge it into an empire. And so the story of Rome pressed forward, as it always had, with steel, with fire, and with the unshakable belief that it was destined to rule. Across the sea from Rome lay Carthage, a city of merchants and seafarers, its harbors filled with ships, its coffers heavy with gold. It was said The Phoenicians who founded it worshipped gods who demanded fire, that their wealth was paid for in the cries of children sacrificed to the flames. Whether true or not, to Romans, Carthage was both rival and mystery, a power that mirrored their own ambition. The two could not share the Mediterranean. Their collision was inevitable. The First Punic War began not over grand strategy, but a small conflict in Sicily. What started as a quarrel between mercenaries drew Rome and Carthage into a struggle that lasted more than 20 years. Rome had no navy, no tradition of sea warfare, but the Republic was nothing if not adaptable. They captured a Carthaginian ship, studied its design, and built hundreds like it. The Romans even devised the corvus, a boarding plank with an iron spike, turning sea battles into infantry fights. Slowly, painfully, they learned to fight on water. By 241 BCE, Carthage sued for peace. Rome had won its first war overseas, gaining Sicily as its first province. But the peace was brittle. In Spain, Carthage rebuilt under the leadership of the Barca family. One son, Hannibal, grew up swearing eternal hatred for Rome. He was a soldier of brilliance, bold beyond measure, and he sought to strike where Rome least expected. In 218 BCE, he led his army from Spain, across the Pyrenees, through Gaul, and over the Alps into Italy. The journey was a nightmare of snow, rock, and ambush. War elephants slipped on icy paths, soldiers starved and froze, yet Hannibal emerged from the mountains with a force still strong enough to challenge Rome. At the Trebia River, he lured the Romans into icy waters and slaughtered them. At Lake Trasimene, he ambushed an entire Roman column, the largest ambush in ancient history, and left the ground soaked with Roman blood. But it was at Cannae, in 216 BCE, that Hannibal reached his terrible peak. Outnumbered, he drew the Romans into his center, then closed his cavalry on their flanks. Trapped in a deadly ring, the Roman legions were cut down where they stood. 70,000 died in a single day. No Roman defeat was ever so complete, no Roman despair so deep, and yet Rome did not fall. The Republic refused peace, refused to yield. They raised new armies, year after year, even as Hannibal roamed the Italian countryside. The Senate ordered that no negotiations be made, no matter the cost. While Hannibal sought allies, Rome wore him down. Scipio Africanus carried the war into Spain, then into Africa itself. Hannibal was recalled to defend Carthage. At the Battle of Zama, in 202 BCE, Scipio outmaneuvered him, using discipline and strategy to break the Carthaginian lines. Hannibal was defeated, and Carthage forced into humiliating terms. Rome had endured, and now Rome dominated. But Carthage was not yet dead. Half a century later, Roman statesmen argued that as long as it stood, Rome would never be safe. Cato the Elder ended every speech in the Senate with the same words: Carthage must be destroyed. In 149 BCE, Rome declared war again. After a brutal siege, the city was stormed in 146 BCE. The streets ran with fire, temples fell in ruins, and survivors were sold into slavery. Some later claimed that the Romans salted the earth to curse the land, though this was likely legend. What is certain is that Carthage was no more. Rome stood unrivaled in the Western Mediterranean. The victory came at a price. Wealth poured into Rome, but so did inequality. The rich grew richer, seizing lands and working them with slaves captured in war. Small farmers, once the backbone of the Republic, sank into poverty. The city swelled with desperate men, citizens with no land, no work, no hope. They crowded the forums, waiting for politicians who might promise them bread or revenge. In this turbulent age, the brothers Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus rose. They were tribunes of the people, men who sought to return land to the poor, to ease the suffering of Rome's dispossessed. Tiberius proposed laws to limit the vast estates of the rich. The Senate resisted, fearing the loss of privilege. In a violent clash, Tiberius was beaten to death, his body thrown into the Tiber River. A decade later, his brother Gaius took up the cause. He proposed new reforms, offered citizenship to Rome's allies, and tried to challenge the Senate's grip. Again, violence answered him. Surrounded by enemies, Gaius took his own life. The Gracchi were dead, but their blood marked a turning point. The Republic had crossed into an era where politics was decided not by debate, but by force. Out of this chaos came new figures. Gaius Marius, a general of humble birth, reformed the army. No longer would only landowners serve. Now the poor could enlist, fighting not for their farms, but for their commander's promises. The legions became professional soldiers, loyal to their general rather than the state. Rome had won unmatched power, but it had planted a seed of civil war. Marius found rivals in the Senate and in Lucius Cornelius Sulla, another ambitious general. Their struggle tore Rome apart. When Sulla marched his army into the city itself, a thing no Roman had dared before, the Republic's last taboos shattered. He seized power, declared himself dictator, and filled the streets with executions. The proscriptions, lists of enemies marked for death, stained Rome with blood. Property was confiscated, rivals destroyed. The Republic survived, but each civil war left it weaker, more fragile. In these years of turmoil, rebellion flared across the empire. In Italy, Rome's allies, long denied full citizenship, rose in the social war. They fought fiercely, but Rome, though battered, prevailed. At last, citizenship was granted more widely, but only after tens of thousands had died. In the east, King Mithridates of Pontus challenged Roman authority, unleashing massacres of Roman citizens. Roman generals fought him for decades, enriching themselves in the process. And then came Spartacus, a gladiator trained to kill for sport. He broke free from his masters and raised a slave army. For 2 years, Spartacus and his followers defeated Roman legions, marching across Italy, burning estates, freeing thousands. At last, the rebellion was crushed by Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome. 6,000 slaves were crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies hanging as a warning against defiance. Rome had survived the revolt, but the fear it inspired never left. The Republic was bleeding, pulled between inequality, ambition, and war. In this atmosphere, 3 men would rise above all others: Crassus, the wealthy; Pompey the Great, the celebrated general; and Julius Caesar, a man of cunning charm and unyielding ambition. They formed an alliance, a triumvirate, to dominate the Republic. But alliances in Rome never lasted. Rivalry, greed, and destiny would soon tear them apart, setting the stage for the end of the Republic and the birth of an empire. Rome's destiny was no longer in the hands of the Senate. It belonged to the generals, the men who commanded loyalty not through laws, but through blood and steel. And soon one man, Julius Caesar, would test whether Rome's system of balance could survive when ambition reached for the crown. Julius Caesar was not born the most powerful man in Rome. He was born into an old patrician family, but one that had lost much of its former influence. Ambitious from youth, he attached himself to allies who could advance his career, displaying charm and brilliance in both politics and war. Caesar knew that in Rome, survival and glory were won not just in the forum, but on the battlefield. As consul, he maneuvered with Crassus and Pompey, forming the alliance known as the First Triumvirate. With their backing, he secured command in Gaul. For nearly a decade, he waged campaigns there, subduing tribe after tribe, writing his own commentaries that would one day be studied as models of prose and propaganda alike. His victories were staggering, his ruthlessness legendary. At Alesia, he surrounded the Gallic leader Vercingetorix with walls of earthworks, so massive they stunned even his enemies. When the Gauls broke, tens of thousands were slaughtered or enslaved. Caesar had conquered Gaul, adding immense wealth to Rome, and more importantly, he had forged a personal army devoted entirely to him. The Senate grew fearful. Pompey, once Caesar's ally, turned against him. Ordered to disband his forces and return to Rome as a private citizen, Caesar faced a choice: submit and lose everything, or defy the law. In 49 BCE, he led his legion across the Rubicon River. The die is cast, he is said to have whispered. By crossing that boundary, he declared war on the Senate itself. Civil war engulfed Rome. Caesar moved with astonishing speed. He chased Pompey to Greece and crushed him at Pharsalus. Pompey fled to Egypt, only to be betrayed and murdered by those hoping to please Caesar. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria and was shown Pompey's severed head, he wept. Yet he stayed, drawn into Egyptian politics and into the arms of Queen Cleopatra. Their affair would scandalize Rome, but for Caesar it was also a bond with one of the most powerful rulers of the age. In the years that followed, Caesar triumphed everywhere he went. At Zela, in Asia Minor, he defeated a king so swiftly that he wrote 3 words home to the Senate: Veni, vidi, vici came. I saw, I conquered. He returned to Rome the master of the Republic. Appointed dictator for life, he enacted sweeping reforms. He relieved debts, expanded the Senate, reformed the calendar into the Julian system, and opened citizenship to many beyond Italy. He sought to knit the empire together under his personal authority. But ambition is dangerous in Rome. Senators whispered that he meant to make himself king, a word that carried poison since the expulsion of the Tarquins centuries before. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, as Caesar entered the Senate, he was surrounded by men he thought his friends. Dozens of knives slashed. Among the assassins was Brutus, whom Caesar loved as a son. Staggering beneath the blows, he fell at the foot of Pompey's statue. The Republic had struck back, but in doing so, it unleashed chaos. The conspirators had not saved the Republic, they had doomed it. Civil war returned. Caesar's allies Mark Antony and Octavian, his adopted heir, moved against the assassins. At Philippi, the armies of Brutus and Cassius were defeated. The killers of Caesar fell on their swords, but Rome was not at peace. Antony and Octavian divided power uneasily. Antony allied with Cleopatra, ruling in the east, while Octavian commanded the west. Their rivalry grew into war. In 31 BCE, at the naval battle of Actium, Octavian's forces triumphed. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, where, hunted and cornered, they chose death over capture. Octavian emerged as the sole master of Rome. But he was careful not to call himself king. He styled himself princeps, the first citizen, cloaking his supremacy in the robes of the Republic. In 27 BC, the Senate granted him the title Augustus. The Republic was gone in all but name. The empire had begun. Augustus ruled with patience and subtlety. He kept the Senate, the consuls, and the assemblies, but all power flowed through him. He reorganized the provinces, created a professional civil service, and established a permanent standing army. His reign brought stability after decades of war. Temples rose, marble replaced brick, and the arts flourished under his patronage. Poets like Virgil and Horace sang of Rome's destiny, of empire without end. Augustus understood that power required not only legions, but imagination. Under Augustus, Rome entered the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For 2 centuries, the empire enjoyed an era of relative stability unparalleled in its history. Roads stretched across continents, carrying armies, merchants, and ideas. Aqueducts poured water into cities where fountains splashed and baths steamed. The Mediterranean became Mare Nostrum, our sea, a Roman lake encircled by provinces and colonies. Trade flowed from Britain's tin mines, Spain's silver, Egypt's grain, and the spices and silks of the East. But peace did not mean weakness. The legions remained the backbone of the empire, stationed along frontiers from the Rhine to the Euphrates. In Germania, Rome suffered one of its greatest defeats when 3 legions were ambushed in the Teutoburg forest in 9 CE. Trapped in the woods, betrayed by their guide, the soldiers were slaughtered to the last man. Rome's expansion into Germany ended there. Augustus, on hearing the news, was said to wander his palace in grief, crying, "Varus, give me back my legions." Despite such disasters, the empire held. Augustus died in 14 CE, leaving behind a system that would endure for centuries. His successors varied wildly. Tiberius, grim and suspicious, ruled effectively but without love. Caligula descended into madness, declaring himself divine, lavishing riches on absurd projects, and spreading fear through executions. Claudius, thought weak and foolish, surprised all by governing with wisdom and conquering Britain. Nero, remembered as a tyrant, indulged in extravagance while the city burned. Rome endured them all. The dynasty of Augustus gave way to the Flavians. Vespasian, a soldier of humble origin, restored order after civil war and began construction of the Colosseum. His son Titus opened it with games that lasted 100 days, even as Pompeii and Herculaneum lay buried in ash after Vesuvius erupted. Domitian ruled with suspicion and cruelty, but the empire survived. Then came the 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius ruled with wisdom, bringing the empire to its height. Under Trajan, the empire stretched from the sands of Arabia to the highlands of Scotland. In Dacia, he carved victories that filled Rome with gold. Hadrian drew back the borders, building walls to mark the limits of Roman power, and traveling the empire to strengthen its foundations. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, fought on the frontiers against relentless barbarian invasions, writing meditations on duty and mortality, even as plague ravaged his people. Daily life in the empire flourished. Cities were adorned with theaters, baths, and temples. Citizens bathed, dined, and debated in forums shaded by colonnades. Gladiators clashed in arenas, chariots thundered in the Circus Maximus, and philosophers lectured in schools. The empire was brutal, yes, built on conquest and slavery, but it was also a tapestry of cultures woven together under Roman law. Latin spread in the west, Greek in the east. Gods and cults from every land found their place beneath the Roman pantheon. The Pax Romana was not perfect, but it was remarkable. For generations, Romans believed their empire eternal, their order unbreakable. And yet, beyond the borders, storms gathered. The peace would not last forever. The death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE marked the end of Rome's golden age. His son Commodus took the throne, and with him came decay. Commodus fancied himself a gladiator, parading in the arena, while the empire he inherited began to crumble. He squandered wealth, alienated the Senate, and trusted unworthy favorites. In 192 CE, he was strangled in his bath, and with his death began a century of chaos. The year 193 became known as the Year of the Five Emperors. Pretenders rose and fell in quick succession, buying the loyalty of legions, assassinating rivals, and plunging Rome into civil war. The empire still had strength, but its stability was broken. From this turmoil rose Septimius Severus, a general from North Africa. He tightened the grip of the military on politics, rewarding soldiers and weakening the Senate's power. His dynasty ruled for a few decades, but beneath the surface, cracks spread wider. Rome was changing. No longer was it the city of farmer soldiers. Now it was an empire run by generals and bureaucrats, financed by taxes squeezed from provinces that were growing restless. The frontiers strained under pressure. In the east, the Sassanid Persians rose to challenge Rome with equal strength. In the north, Germanic tribes grew bolder. The economy faltered as inflation soared and silver coins were debased. Plagues ravaged the cities, cutting down thousands and leaving fields untilled. The 3rd century was an age of constant upheaval. Between 235 and 284 CE, more than 24 emperors rose and fell, most dying violently. Some reigned only months before betrayal struck them down. This was the crisis of the 3rd century. The empire nearly split apart. Breakaway states formed the Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east, each ruling like independent kingdoms while Rome itself faltered. Armies turned against each other as often as against Rome's enemies. Yet even in crisis, Rome found resilience. Aurelian, one of the soldier emperors, fought to restore unity. He reconquered the lost provinces, defeated the Palmyrenes under their queen Zenobia, and earned the title Restorer of the World. He built massive walls around Rome, recognizing at last that the eternal city itself was vulnerable. But Aurelian too was murdered by his own men, proof that no emperor was safe. By the late 3rd century, it seemed Rome might collapse entirely. Then came Diocletian. Rising from humble origins, he seized power in 284 CE and brought order to chaos. Recognizing that one man could no longer rule the vast empire, he created the Tetrarchy, 4 rulers, 2 senior Augusti and 2 junior Caesars, dividing the empire east and west. He reformed the army, reorganized the provinces, and tried to stabilize the currency. Under his hand, the empire breathed again. But Diocletian also sought unity through control. Suspicious of the growing Christian movement, he launched the Great Persecution, attempting to wipe the faith out with prisons, torture, and executions. Yet persecution only strengthened the Christians' resolve. When Diocletian retired in 305, the Tetrarchy soon dissolved into civil war. Generals and claimants fought for dominance once more, until one man emerged victorious, Constantine. Constantine was a soldier of rare vision. Before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 CE, he is said to have seen a cross of light in the sky, accompanied by the words, "In this sign, conquer." He ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol on their shields. Victory was his. The next year, he issued the Edict of Milan, granting tolerance to Christianity. The persecuted faith now gained imperial protection. Constantine transformed the empire. He founded a new capital on the site of Byzantium, renaming it Constantinople. Situated between Europe and Asia, rich in trade, and easily defended, it would outlast Rome itself. He convened the Council of Nicaea, seeking unity within Christianity, and tied the empire's fate to the new faith. When he died in 337 CE, he left behind a changed world. Rome was no longer pagan, no longer centered only on the city of Rome, but a Christian empire with two great capitals. Yet even Constantine's reforms could not save the West. The empire was too vast, too divided. The East, wealthier and more urbanized, thrived under Constantinople's watch. But the West, plagued by poverty, corruption, and endless invasions, staggered. Emperors came and went, many mere children or puppets of powerful generals. The frontiers broke. In 376 CE, the Goths, fleeing the advance of the Huns, sought refuge within Roman territory. Betrayed and mistreated, they rose in revolt. At the Battle of Adrianople in 378, the Goths annihilated a Roman army, killing Emperor Valens. It was one of Rome's most catastrophic defeats, proof that the legions were no longer invincible. The invaders pressed deeper. Alaric, king of the Visigoths, marched on Rome itself. In 410 CE, his army entered the city, looting and burning. For the first time in 8 centuries, the eternal city was sacked. The shock echoed across the world. "Rome has perished," cried the historian Jerome, "and with it the whole world has collapsed." Yet Rome still staggered on. In 455 CE, another sack came, this time by the Vandals, who stripped the city of its treasures. Provinces fell away one by one, Britain abandoned, Gaul overrun, Spain seized by Visigoths and Suebi, Africa lost to the Vandals. Without these provinces, the West was starved of wealth and grain. By the mid-5th century, Rome faced its most terrifying enemy, Attila the Hun. His horsemen swept across Europe, leaving devastation in their wake. In 452, he advanced on Italy itself. Yet legend tells that Pope Leo I met him, speaking words that turned Attila back. Whether it was diplomacy, famine, or fear of plague that saved Rome, the city was spared. But Attila's death did not save the empire. In 476 CE, the end came quietly. A boy emperor named Romulus Augustulus sat on the throne, a child with no real power. The Germanic general Odoacer deposed him, sending the imperial regalia to Constantinople. The Western Roman Empire was no more. The Senate still met, the city still stood, but the empire that had once ruled the known world was gone. In the East, however, the story was not finished. Constantinople still gleamed, its walls unbroken, its emperors still calling themselves Romans. For another 1,000 years, the empire endured in the East, carrying the legacy of Rome long after the West had fallen into shadow. Though the Western Empire had collapsed, Rome itself was not entirely gone. In the East, Constantinople stood as a new Rome, a city of marble palaces, golden domes, and towering walls that glimmered above the Bosporus. Here, emperors still wore the purple, still called themselves Augustus, still ruled under the name of Rome. The Byzantines, as we call them now, saw themselves as nothing less than Romans, the true heirs of an eternal empire. Constantinople was no ordinary city. Its location was chosen with care by Constantine. It sat at the meeting point of Europe and Asia, at the crossroads of trade routes that carried silks from China, spices from India, and grain from Egypt. Its harbors filled with ships, its markets with treasures from 3 continents. Most of all, it was defensible. Massive triple walls surrounded it, walls that would withstand siege after siege for 1,000 years. Where Rome itself had crumbled under barbarian attack, Constantinople would endure. The emperors of Byzantium inherited the Roman system but reshaped it to survive. Justinian, who ruled in the 6th century, dreamed of reconquering the West. His brilliant general Belisarius defeated the Vandals in Africa and the Ostrogoths in Italy. For a moment it seemed Rome might be restored. The Hagia Sophia rose under Justinian's reign, its dome so vast that men who entered it thought they had stepped into heaven itself. Justinian also gave the empire its most lasting gift, the codification of Roman law. The Corpus Juris Civilis gathered centuries of legal thought into a single body, a foundation that would influence Europe's laws for centuries to come. But the empire faced dangers on all sides. In the east, the Persians challenged its borders. In the 7th century, a new power arose, the armies of Islam. In a matter of decades, Arab warriors swept through Syria, Egypt, and North Africa, provinces that had once fed and enriched Rome. The empire staggered, but Constantinople held firm, repelling Arab sieges with a secret weapon, Greek fire, a liquid flame that burned even on water, terrifying all who faced it. The Byzantines adapted to survive. They reorganized their territories into themes, military districts governed by generals, so they could react swiftly to attack. They became masters of diplomacy, using gold, marriage, and religion as weapons as potent as swords. For centuries, Constantinople was the heart of Christendom. Its emperors crowned not just as rulers, but as God's chosen on earth. Yet survival came at a cost. The empire became narrower, more Greek than Roman, more Eastern than Western. The Latin of the old empire gave way to Greek as the language of government. The church became central, with bishops and patriarchs shaping policy as much as emperors. Still, they clung to their Roman name, their Roman pride. They called themselves the Basiles, Romaean emperors of the Romans. The empire's fortunes rose and fell like the tides. Basil II the Bulgar Slayer extended its power in the 10th and 11th centuries, crushing enemies with ruthless efficiency. Yet only a generation later, disaster struck at Manzikert in 1071, when the Seljuk Turks shattered the Byzantine army and seized much of Anatolia, the empire's heartland. Weakened, Byzantium turned to the west for aid. The call for help sparked the First Crusade, and for a time Western knights marched through Constantinople to fight the Turks. But mistrust simmered. The Latin West and the Greek East had grown apart in faith and custom. In 1054, the Church itself split in the Great Schism, dividing Catholic West from Orthodox East. The unity of Christendom was broken, and Byzantium found itself increasingly isolated. The greatest betrayal came not from Muslims, but from fellow Christians. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, Western armies turned on Constantinople itself. They stormed the city, looting its treasures, desecrating its churches, and shattering its pride. The empire splintered, its people never forgetting the humiliation. Though Constantinople was recaptured decades later, the empire never fully recovered. The final centuries were a long twilight. Piece by piece, The empire was stripped away. Turks pressed in from Asia, Slavs from the north, Latins from the west. Constantinople remained magnificent, but its empire dwindled to a shadow. By the 15th century, it was little more than the city and a few scraps of territory, an island of marble surrounded by an ocean of enemies. In 1453, the end came. The Ottomans, led by Sultan Mehmed, i.e., laid siege to Constantinople with cannons that thundered against its ancient walls. For weeks, the city resisted, its defenders hopelessly outnumbered, clinging to their faith and their past. On May 29, the final assault broke through. Emperor Constantine XI, the last Roman emperor, is said to have cast off his crown and charged into battle, vanishing into legend. The city fell. Hagia Sophia, once the greatest church in Christendom, became a mosque. The empire of the Romans was no more. And yet Rome never truly died. Its spirit lingered in ways both visible and unseen. Its law shaped the codes of Europe. Its architecture inspired cathedrals and palaces. Its roads, though broken, became the skeleton of nations. Its language, Latin, lived on in Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, and in the words of scholars, scientists, and priests. Even its dream of empire haunted kings and conquerors. Charlemagne crowned himself a new Roman emperor. Napoleon dreamed of reviving Rome's glory. Mussolini proclaimed a reborn empire, though his pretensions collapsed in fire. Rome's legacy was not only in power, but in ideas. The notion of a republic, of citizens bound by law and duty, carried into the modern world. The writings of Cicero and Seneca influenced thinkers of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Roman Stoicism echoed in the philosophies of leaders centuries later. The balance of powers that the Republic once tried to maintain became a model for governments across the globe. But Rome's legacy was also in memory. To walk among its ruins is to feel time itself pressing close. The Colosseum still stands, its arches scarred but proud. The aqueducts still rise against the horizon, empty but unbroken. In Constantinople, now Istanbul, the domes of Hagia Sophia still stretch toward heaven. Rome endures in stone and story, in law and language, in the whispers of ambition that stir in every seat of power. Rome was born in myth, forged in conquest, raised to glory, and cast down in ruin. It was cruel, brilliant, savage, and sublime. It enslaved millions, yet gave law to nations. It burned cities, yet built wonders. It worshipped gods without number, then embraced one God above all. Its empire is gone, but its shadow remains eternal. As long as people dream of greatness, as long as ambition drives men and women to shape the world, Rome will live on. Rome has never truly fallen. Rome is eternal. Rome was not only legions and emperors, it was people, millions of lives, each with their own story, each woven into the empire's fabric. To understand Rome, you must walk not only through its palaces, but through its streets. Imagine the noise of the Forum, the heart of public life. Merchants shouted their wares, lawyers argued cases before eager crowds, priests led rituals to the gods, and senators in their white togas debated laws that could shape the fate of nations. Rome was power, but it was also chaos. In the taverns and insulae, the cramped apartment blocks where the poor lived, wine was cheap, gossip flowed, and fires were constant dangers. In the great villas of the wealthy, mosaics glittered, fountains splashed, and meals stretched for hours. Dishes of dormice, rolled in honey, garum fish sauce, poured on nearly everything, and wines sweetened with herbs and spices. Slaves cooked and served, the silent machinery that made Roman luxury possible. Beyond the city, life in the provinces could be harsh or thriving. In Britain, soldiers huddled by Hadrian's Wall, staring north into misty lands of tribes who would never be conquered. In Egypt, grain ships left Alexandria to feed the hungry mouths of Rome. In Africa, olive oil was pressed in great estates, its jars carried across the sea. In Gaul and Spain, Roman baths and theatres rose alongside native traditions, a blending of cultures under the empire's vast umbrella. To be Roman was no longer simply to be from Rome. It was to live under Roman law, to share in Roman order. Yet the empire was also haunted by fear and spectacle. The Colosseum was not just entertainment, it was a reminder of Rome's power. Gladiators, slaves trained to fight, faced beasts and men for the pleasure of the crowd. Some were volunteers, seeking fame. Most were not. When the games began, trumpets blared, the emperor gave the signal, and the blood of men and animals soaked the sand. The people cheered, for in that arena, Rome's power was made flesh. And yet, even as the crowd roared, some whispered that the empire was losing its soul. Religion spread, transforming the empire from within. The old gods of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus still stood in marble, but new cults arrived from the east, the worship of Isis, the mysteries of Mithras, the philosophy of Stoics and Epicureans. Among them rose a small, persecuted sect, the Christians. Meeting in catacombs by candlelight, they spoke of one God, of salvation, of a kingdom not of this world. The empire tried to crush them with fire and sword, yet the faith grew. In time, it would outlive the empire itself, becoming one of Rome's most enduring legacies. The army, once the pride of Rome, became both protector and predator. Soldiers fought fiercely on the frontiers, but they also made and unmade emperors. A legion's loyalty was bought with land, donatives, and promises. When emperors failed to pay, rebellion brewed. To be emperor was to walk a knife's edge between power and death. Few died peacefully. And then there were the disasters no army could stop. In 79 CE, Mount Vesuvius erupted with a fury that turned day into night. The cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were buried in ash and stone. People died where they stood, their final moments frozen in time. Centuries later, their plaster casts would shock the world. Men, women, and children caught in terror, a city preserved at the instant of its destruction. Rome was mighty, but even Rome could not command the earth. Not all resistance came from foreign armies. In 60 CE, in the distant province of Britannia, a queen named Boudicca led a revolt against Rome. Her warriors burned cities, slaughtered tens of thousands, and for a moment it seemed the province might be lost. Rome struck back with brutal efficiency, crushing her uprising in rivers of blood. Her rebellion became legend, proof that even in conquered lands, Rome's rule was never absolute. Over centuries, emperors rose and fell, some remembered with awe, others cursed with infamy. Some built monuments that still stand, others left only ruin, but all of them were bound in the same struggle to hold together an empire too vast for any one man, too fragile to last forever. And when the Western Empire finally fell, it was not with a single sword stroke, but with a slow, weary collapse. Provinces slipped away. Armies became mercenaries. The Senate debated as it always had, but the world had moved on. The empire did not die in a moment, but faded, like the embers of a fire that once blazed across the earth. The Byzantines carried the torch, calling themselves Romans until the very end. But when Constantinople fell in 1453, when the last emperor died fighting on the walls, the story of Rome as empire closed. What remained was memory, influence, and legend. Rome's story is not only about its rise and fall, it is about the idea it carried that order could be built from chaos, that law could bind people of 1,000 tongues, that ambition could drive a city of shepherds to rule the world. Rome was human in every sense, proud, cruel, generous, corrupt, brilliant, and flawed. And perhaps that is why it endures. We see ourselves in Rome, our strengths, our failures, our hunger for power, and our fear of decline. Rome was born in myth. It lived in glory. It died in ruin. And yet, in ways that matter, it never died at all. Rome whispers in every courthouse, every republic, every dream of empire. Rome is not the past. Rome is eternal. Rome did not end with a single fall. It ended 1,000 times, slowly, painfully, like a candle burning at both ends, until nothing remained but smoke. And yet, in another sense, it has never ended at all. Rome still walks among us, though we do not always see it. It lives in our languages, in our governments, in the stones beneath our feet, in the very way we think about power, order, and civilization. To speak of Rome is not only to speak of the past, but of the present, and perhaps the future. Walk through the ruins today, and you can feel it. The Colosseum rises like the skeleton of a giant, its arches broken but defiant. The Forum lies quiet, its once busy plazas now scattered with fragments of marble, the broken jaws of statues staring silently at the sky. The aqueducts still stride across the countryside, stone arches built to last millennia. Farmers plow fields beside them, just as their ancestors did when Caesar lived. The stones are scarred, but they remain. They remind us that Rome was not a dream. It was real, built by human hands, sustained by human will, and undone by human flaws. But Rome is more than stone. It is memory. And memory is more dangerous, more enduring than walls or legions. Rome's memory became the foundation of kingdoms, the dream of emperors, the obsession of tyrants. Charlemagne crowned himself Emperor of the Romans. The Holy Roman Empire claimed descent from Caesar's glory, though Voltaire once quipped it was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. Napoleon clothed himself in Roman imagery, his legions marching as Caesar's once had. Mussolini promised a new Rome, a reborn empire, strutting through the ruins as if history itself had blessed him. Again and again, leaders sought legitimacy by invoking the ghost of Rome. But why? Why does Rome linger while other empires vanish into obscurity? Part of the answer lies in its sheer scale. Rome ruled for centuries, spanning continents, touching lives from the deserts of Africa to the highlands of Scotland. The people it conquered did not forget, and part lies in its adaptability. Rome was not rigid, it absorbed, borrowed, reshaped. It took gods from Greece, engineering from Etruscans, philosophy from the East, and bound them all together under its eagle. Rome was never only Roman. It was the world in miniature. Yet the deepest reason Rome endures is because it speaks to something universal. Rome was human gloriously, fatally human. It was brilliant and cruel, disciplined and decadent, noble and corrupt. It rose because of courage and ambition, and it fell for the same reasons. We look at Rome, and we see ourselves. That is why its story never dies. The fall of Rome has long been a warning. Historians debate its causes, corruption, overextension, plague, economic collapse, invasion, a failure of leadership, perhaps all of them, perhaps none alone. But what strikes us most is not the fall itself, but the fact that Rome seemed unthinkable in decline. To its citizens, the empire was eternal. The roads stretched endlessly, the aqueducts flowed, the armies marched. Who could imagine it ending? And yet slowly, the lights went out. Cities shrank, trade faltered, knowledge was forgotten. The world grew smaller, darker. It is a reminder that no power, however great, is immune to time. When we gaze at Rome's ruins, we do not only ask, why did they fall? We also whisper, could it happen to us? For in every great nation, every superpower, every empire, there is a belief in permanence. Rome warns us that permanence is an illusion. Power is not eternal. It must be earned, sustained, renewed. But Rome offers more than warning. It also offers inspiration. Its legal traditions echo in our courts. The idea that citizens should be bound by laws, not rulers, comes from Rome. The architecture of capitals and parliaments borrows its columns. The languages of half the world's people descend from Latin. Even the Christian faith, now spread across the globe, was shaped within Rome's walls. When we speak of Western civilization, we speak of Rome's child. Yet Rome's legacy is not only Western. The Byzantines carried its flame in the East, blending Roman order with Greek culture and Christian faith. The Muslims who conquered Roman lands preserved and translated its texts, passing them back to Europe centuries later. The Renaissance, that explosion of art and learning, was born from Rome's rediscovery. Rome belongs not to one people, but to the world. And still, Rome is also myth. Aeneas fleeing Troy, Romulus killing Remus, Caesar crossing the Rubicon. These stories are not merely history, they are parables of ambition, destiny, betrayal, and fate. They endure because they are more than Roman, they are human. Who has not known rivalry between brothers? Who has not faced a choice that, once taken, cannot be undone? Who has not dreamed of glory, only to be undone by pride? Rome's myths are mirrors showing us who we are. Perhaps this is why Rome has never truly died. It is not only a city, nor only an empire. It is an idea of order imposed on chaos, of civilization rising from wilderness, of ambition reaching beyond limits. That idea outlives walls, outlives legions, outlives emperors. And so, when we speak of Rome as eternal, it is not because the stones still stand, but because the story still matters. The ruins of Rome are not silent. They whisper warnings and promises both. They tell us that greatness can be won, but also lost. They remind us that no empire is invincible, yet also that no fall erases what was built. Rome fell, but the world it created did not vanish. It became the foundation upon which others built. So walk the forum at dusk, when the shadows stretch long and the stones glow in fading light. Imagine senators debating beneath marble columns, merchants shouting in the markets, legionaries marching through the gates. Then let the silence fall. In that silence lies the truth of Rome. Not eternal in power, but eternal in memory. Not eternal in rule, but eternal in influence. For as long as human beings dream of empire, of law, of order, of greatness, Rome will live on. Rome is not the past. Rome is a mirror, and when we gaze into it, we do not only see what was. We see what is. We see what might be again. Rome is eternal not in stone, not in empire, but in us.